On behalf of Teach the Shoah, I'd like to welcome you all to sharing their stories, Kristallnacht and the Kindertransport. This evening, we will be delving into the history that leads us to Kristallnacht and the Kindertransport, and we will be hearing 3 true testimony-based stories by Amy Meyer, Jenna Price, and Michelle Ultmann. We will also be hearing a poem written specifically for today by Cantor Karen Weber. So we will start off our evening by listening to Jenna Price telling the story of Fred Emil Katz.
I was born in a small farming village in northern Bavaria called Oberlauringen. It was an isolated town, no running water, and only one phone at the post office, and no police. I distinctly remember there being 2 worlds, the non-Jewish world and the Jewish world. The non-Jewish world consisted of going to public school, and the Jewish world consisted of going to synagogue and Hebrew school. My father, Max, owned a kosher butcher shop. We had a large 2-story house. On the top were the bedrooms, and on the bottom was my father's butcher shop. He was a very emotionally detached person. My mother, Shani, however, was a warm, loving, hugging woman. Whenever anyone in the village was sick, she would take care of them. And my sister was sent to Ohio in 1937 to live with family. I had an older stepbrother who was a beacon of love. He would bring me presents, and he was just so kind and warm. In the synagogue, we had assigned seating. I would sit next to my father, and my mother sat up in the balcony because men and women had to be separated. I can hear the songs that they sang and the prayers that they recited. There was a vitality in the synagogue, a feeling of Jews being alive together. In 1933, when I started school, Hitler had just come into power. I felt a feeling of pain and horror because every day on my way to school, the Christian children felt it was their right, their duty, to beat me up. At the end of the year, when we received the report from my teacher, she said, "Fred is scared. Fred is angstly." Hitler was a powerful presence that hung over everything. I listened to his speeches on the radio. He seemed to permeate all of life. Anti-Semitism came at all of us at the same time, Jewish students and non-Jewish students. And I remember thinking, wow, there must be something there if they are so angry at us. Kristallnacht, or the Night of the Broken Glass, is a day that stands out in my mind because it happened on the night before my 11th birthday. You see, I was born on November 10th, and Kristallnacht took place from November 9th to the 10th. During the day on the 9th, cars came into our village. And I remember thinking, that's odd, because we didn't have cars. People got out of the cars and arrested all of the Jewish men, including my 17-year-old brother and my father. We didn't know what was happening. My mother and I hid in a neighbor's attic. And the whole night we heard smashing of buildings and broken glass and people were shouting, "Where are the Jews?" We lived in terror that night, wondering, are they going to find us? Are they going to kill us? The next day, when it was quiet, we came out, and we saw rubble everywhere. Our house had been destroyed, the furniture smashed, and the mattresses ripped open with feathers everywhere. The synagogue had been destroyed, and the Torah thrown in a pile of manure. This hurt me more than the desecration of my own home. After 2 months, the men in the regional jail were sent back home, including my father and my brother. And the men from the concentration camps came back as well, including the baker, my neighbor. I didn't recognize him. His head was shaved, his cheeks were collapsed, and his eyes sunken in. He looked like a ghost. And when it came time for the next roundup, he committed suicide. At this point, it became very clear that we were no longer safe in Germany. My parents made countless efforts to get us all out as a family. They heard about a program called the Kindertransport that was taking German Jewish children to England to safety. I'm convinced that my mother found out about this program. She saved my life, and if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here. My parents didn't tell me much about the Kindertransport, where I was going or who would take care of me. All I could think about was I wanted to get out of Germany. I wanted to get away. My mother took me to the train station. My father had to stay home because we didn't have enough money. So I said goodbye to him at the house. My mother embraced me, and she was crying. She put me on the train, and I looked out the window and waved goodbye. I was fearful the entire night. I don't think I talked to anybody. And I remember being drawn inwards to myself. We traveled overnight to Holland and then took a ship to England. And I remember the ship ride was very, very bumpy. We were taken to a coastal camp for about 2 weeks and then sent back to London to a boarding school for a month. And there I met a boy named Manfred Schoenfeld. He was a very nice, roly-poly, fat fellow. Everybody loved him, and I liked him too. From there, I was sent to the Bunce-Court School in Kent and stayed there for the next few years. It was a very progressive co-educational environment. We took academic classes, but the students and the teachers were also expected to take care of the school. We grew food, we cooked, we cleaned. While I was there, I received some letters from my family, and I was reluctant to answer them. I think I only responded 2 or 3 times. And to this day, I have a tremendous guilt because I know that they lived for hearing from their children. I graduated from the Bunce-Court School at 15 and then went to London, where I met a powerful, intellectual German woman named Herta Karger. She was an entrepreneur that had dedicated her life to getting German Jews out of Germany and helping them get back up on their feet. She also took children under her wing, and I was one of those children. For the first time, I felt like I could accomplish something. I could make something of my life. She would invite me to her house on Sunday for lunch, and I was surrounded by architects and professionals and intellectuals. At night, I took chemistry courses, and during the day, worked at a chemical factory. And I wouldn't get home till 10 or 10:30 at night. In 1946, Herta Karger and my cousin decided to emigrate to the United States, to New York, to start a business. And I decided to follow them. I had family in Ohio. I had my aunt and my sister. The war had ended and everybody was so excited, but I just remember feeling a sense of dread because I finally had to face what had happened to my family. I reached out to the Red Cross and found out that my parents had been sent to a transit ghetto in Izbica, Poland. They were declared dead on December 31st, 1942. And my brother, the beacon of love, he was sent to Westerbrück and then to Sobibor, where he was declared dead. These realities became my reality. Living in New York was difficult. I didn't have enough money and I faced anti-Semitism in the field of chemistry, so I couldn't find a job. After about 5 or 6 months, I saved up enough money to visit my family in Ohio. My aunt was such a warm person, just like my mother, Shani. And for the first time in 9 years, somebody embraced me. Somebody held me. My cousin Ted was also very nice. He took me to see different colleges, and he said, "Fred, anybody would be lucky to have you as a student at their college." And again, I felt that I could make something of my life. I could have a future. And I did make a future for myself. I became a professor in sociology. I wrote several books, including 4 Holocaust-related books. And I educated the reader about human behavior and the Holocaust. I also was able to face my experiences during the Holocaust. Sociology was a haven for me, a family. It gave me identity and focus. And I am forever grateful.
Lynn, you were muted. I'm not sure if you still are or not.
Oh no. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. So thank you, Jenna. That was beautifully told. And if anybody has appreciations for Jenna, please leave them in the chat. I'm sure she'll be happy to read them. And this is Fred. We've just heard his story, and I believe that Jenna has been in touch with Fred and learned more details than what were published in different sources. So we're going to start delving into the history now. And we're going to take a few steps back from actual Kristallnacht to July of 1938, the Avian Conference. This was a conference led by world leaders who came together to discuss the Jewish problem. You see, in Germany, the situation for Jews has become worse and worse. It started off when the Nazis came into power with a couple of anti-Jewish laws. It progressed into boycotting of different Jewish businesses, removing Jews from public service, and then the progression of the 1935 Nuremberg laws. And there has been more and more incidents involving Jews over the years. So world leaders come together to discuss the question of what to do with the Jews from the Reich, which is slowly growing at this point. The conclusion of the conference is, oh, there's nothing to do. Nobody will up their quotas of visas. Nobody will take in more refugees. And the situation seems quite dire at the end of the conference. And it gets worse. On the 27th of October, 1938, a new decree is put out in Germany that all Jews of Polish origin, meaning immigrants from Poland to Germany, are to leave the Reich, to go back to Poland. Only there's a bit of a problem. The Polish government closes their borders, and therefore the Jews cannot actually go anywhere. And they all end up in this no man's land near a small, tiny border town called Zabonchen. At the beginning, the first few days between the 27th of October to the 31st of October, about 6,000 Jews, then 17,000 Jews, and all the way to nearly 30,000 Jews find themselves in this no man's land. And we're going to jump forward. We're looking now at a photo of Philip Noel Baker, who was an MP for Derby County at the British government. On November 21st, 1938, there is a meeting in Parliament, and MP Baker addresses the House and says, "I know the House will recognize that this debate can serve no useful purpose unless we speak the truth, unless we face the facts and review the situation as real as it is." And what are the facts? The facts are that on October 7th, a Polish Jew, Grinchban, a boy 17 years of age, entered the German embassy in Paris and attacked a member of the staff, Herr van Roth. 2 days later, Herr van Roth succumbs to his wounds and dies. Now, we could say that he was a victim of a political assassination. We've been told here and elsewhere that his action, Grinchpan's action, were the ones that brought on these atrocities. So every honorable member here in Parliament knows that the main facts that Herr Goebbels in Germany has been stating is that there was a public unrest, a public outcry at the actions of this young boy. A pogrom. One of the British reporters who was in Germany at the time reports to the Daily Telegraph. The entire Jewish population of Germany was subject yesterday to a night of terror. The pogrom started simultaneously all over Germany. No attempt was made, not by the police, not by anybody else, to stop the savagery of this mob. Almost every synagogue in the country was desecrated, burned, broken. Looting occurred everywhere. Part of these synagogues were reduced into shambles. But that wasn't enough. There was also violence. There was humiliation. There were Nazis in uniforms entering private homes, breaking, stealing, causing all sorts of havoc. And that wasn't the worst of it. You see, the damages came to close to the equivalent of 18 million pounds. And you would think in any normal kind of situation that the government would help. No, the government demanded the Jewish community in Germany, in Austria, which is now part of the Reich, and in the Sudetenland to pay reparations to the German government. Stormtroopers in uniforms, they caught men in the street. 91 men were murdered. 30,000 were taken as prisoners to camps, concentration camps, all over the Reich. In one concentration camp in Buchenwald, 70 Jews were killed that night for no apparent reason. Jewish hospital in Berlin, the patients were made to stand in a parade, even the ones that didn't have legs. The brutality was real. And this, honorable members of our parliament today, was all a result of one young boy who heard that his parents were sent to no man's land. They were not allowed to take most of their belongings. They were not allowed to do really anything apart from be there. Well, that's what Herr Goebbels wants us all to believe. But actually, we now understand that that is not the truth. And we are here to discuss the truth. The truth is that this was premeditated. The truth is that already 4 or 5 days before Kristallnacht, Jewish men were arrested. Between the ages of 16 to 60, men were taken away. No apparent reason, apart from being Jewish. At the same time, new laws. Now, Jews are not allowed to participate in any kind of economical way. Their shops cannot be open. Well, now their shops are all broken. They can't have bank accounts anymore. Everything is taken straight into the Reich. And there's more and more posters everywhere saying Jews are not wanted. Jews should leave. Well, of course, we all know this. We've all discussed this already in the conference, but... And what about Grinchban? Can we blame a boy that for more than 6 years was not allowed to study in school, or if he was in school, like many of the other Jewish kids, was made to beg for his lunch and then be denied it in front of everybody? They couldn't sit on a bench in a park or use a tram car. Yes, it was a political assassination. But no, this was not the reason that Kristallnacht happened. We will now hear a story by Amy Meyer.
My name is Olga Drucker, and my maiden name was Olga Maximilia Levy. I was born in December 1927 in Stuttgart, Germany. Well, there was the night of November 9th, 1938. And I woke up to this loud bang, and it was the middle of the night, and I remember sliding under my feather quilt to hide, and I heard these footsteps stomping up the stairs, and right away I thought of the stormtroopers, the men with the marching boots, and I continued to keep my head under the quilt. And I heard strange voices, and I heard shouting and banging, and I remember giving myself a moment to wake up. It was a dream. I kept saying it was a dream. And I dug my fingernails into the palms of my hands to just wake up, wake up. Why were they shouting? Why were they in the house? Wake up. And doors were banging. And I remember at one point, I released my hands and I heard my mother crying softly. And that scared me more than anything. And I started to cry, but I then took my bed sheet and I stuffed it into my mouth. And I just didn't dare move. I barely breathed. And I prayed that the strange men in our house wouldn't find me. And suddenly everything was quiet. And I remember taking the corner of the sheet out of my mouth, and I watched as my door opened slowly. And I held my breath. But no, it was not a strange man. It was only Mama. And she was tiptoeing into my room. I closed my eyes. I started breathing again, and I felt her cool hand on my head, but I pretended to be asleep. And she sighed and she left. And I remember seeing the light seeping through under my door, and I listened for a long time, but I remained so quiet. And then I must have drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I came downstairs for breakfast, and I saw Mama. I saw her face. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying, and it looked like she hadn't slept all night. And I looked, where's Papa? I expected to see him in his usual place. But the chair was empty. And Mama told me, she said, "Ollie, he had to go away for a while." That's all she said. And her voice was strained, as if she'd been rehearsing a difficult line from a play over and over again. And this whole time, this just seemed so unreal. It just seemed like a dream. And any minute I would wake up. But it wasn't a dream, and I couldn't turn the clock back. Some days later, Mama and I, we dared to take the trolley downtown. There was too much talk, and we couldn't believe our eyes. The Nazis had burned down the synagogue, and it was just a charred shell. And streets were lined with shattered glass, and there were buildings on the same street that were left unharmed. The windows of all the Jewish-owned shops, they had been smashed. The broken glass had been left all over. And that next day, there were orders that everything had to be cleaned up. Nazis' orders. Who was ordered to do it? The Jewish store owners. But they were no longer around. Papa was not the only one taken away that night. We learned from 16 to 60 Jewish men were dragged out of their homes and taken away. So who cleaned up? Their wives and children and the elderly. Since Papa was taken away, Mama was on the phone, morning, noon, night. In her conversation, the name of a place kept coming up. It started with a duh. I just remember I couldn't make out the name, but it was a prison camp at this place. And that's where Papa was. I had heard of these prison camps, these concentration camps. It's where the people who disagreed with Hitler were taken. Mama cried a lot. She tried to hide it from me. She'd open her eyes so wide to dry up. So many tears. And I couldn't bear to see her cry. It made me want to cry too. Up until this time, we had no idea what being Jewish meant. We had never celebrated any Jewish holidays, and, well, we actually had a Christmas tree. We had a cook, and we had a maid, and they celebrated Christmas, so did we. And we had an egg hunt in our garden at Easter time. And I was never even inside the synagogue that had been burned down. But about 2 weeks later, Mama said I couldn't go to school anymore. I couldn't see my friends. I had friends from that school who would walk across the street when I went by, and I would wave, and they would pretend they didn't know me. And eventually I realized that something was really wrong. And so Mama, she pulled me out and put me into a Jewish school. And I learned about all the Jewish holidays. Hanukkah was coming up, so I asked Mama if we could light some Hanukkah candles. I wanted to celebrate this festival of lights, as I had just learned. Well, in the kitchen, her eyes beamed, and she took my hand without saying anything, and she led me up to the 3rd floor, the storage room, where there were a lot of boxes, old letters and photographs and Papa's medal from the Great War. And in the corner behind these boxes, she lifted up a Hanukkah menorah, a 9-branched candle holder. It was brass, and it was in need of polishing. She took me downstairs with the menorah, and we went to get some cream, and both of us took turns polishing the menorah as I told her all about what I learned about Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, and freedom. And on the first official night, Mama and I, we lit the first candle and we sang all the songs that I learned in my new Jewish school about Judah and the Maccabees. And I looked forward to lighting each candle night after night as it was added to the first. And I wished that Papa was with us, but he was still at the camp. He finally came home. It was the middle of the night, and I remember Mama, she woke me up and she brought me to my bedroom door, and in the frame was Papa. He was so thin, and he didn't have as much hair on the top of his head. I saw how he had changed. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything. He never talked about those last 6 weeks. After a time, Mama decided that it would be best that I go to England for a while, that she had made these phone calls and had heard about something called Kindertransport. It was the system planned by the Jewish Refugee Committee to transport Jewish children to England. She explained to me that I would be out of danger from what was happening in Germany, and that I would be there safe in England with an English host family, and that Mama and Papa would come. They would come as soon as they can. It would be weeks, maybe a month or two. And I know that these children were already filling the trains, leaving every day, and Mama had my name on the list, and we were waiting for my turn to come up. And in the meantime, Mama started packing things for the suitcase. She knew that I would not be allowed to take anything of value. So we had sweaters and we had warm wool socks. And she snuck a few things in just for my feelings of comfort, my little doll and a little sewing kit so I could sew the buttons that might fall off some of my sweaters. She put in some photographs. And we waited. March 3rd, 1939. This was the day that I was to go to England. I was excited and fearful, all at the same time. I was 11 years old. I was about to leave home all by myself. Before we left for the station, I walked from room to room of our house. I started upstairs and I went all the way down into the cellar where the wine was and the laundry room. And I saw Pipe, our canary, perched on her cage. And she was looking at me. And she turned her head, her beautiful yellow feathers. And I waited, but she didn't sing. She normally sings to me when I come to the cage. And then I was sure that she knew I was leaving for good.
Thank you, Amy. That was beautifully told. Again, please give your appreciations to Amy in the chat. She would love to see them. And this is Olga. as a young child for the Kindertransport and as an adult giving testimony. So, this little artistic interlude. Holocaust survivor Gabriella Crane, who is a very, very talented sculptor and artist, has created this piece, which is being presented just now in LA at the UCLA Hillel House. And this piece is called the Kindertransport. So, leading up to the Kindertransport, before it even became a thing, there were classified ads in British newspapers, mainly from Jewish families, we should say, that were looking for ways to help save more Jews. So looking for hired help. And then we also have classified ads from Jewish families in Austria and in Germany saying that they're willing to come and work. So this is a small sample from the British newspaper archive from the 3rd of August, 1938. And it's interesting how when there were no visas, there were no certificates, people found very interesting ways in trying to get out from the Reich, one of them being work. So going back to November 21st, to our meeting at Parliament. So the first Viscount of Templewood was, at the time, in November 38, the representative for the Home Office. Now, the Home Office had been dealing with refugees from Germany, from the Sudetenland, from Austria. The Home Office also dealt with the certificates for Jews who were trying to make their way to mandatory Palestine, to Israel. And he actually states in front of Parliament quite proudly that, from whenever Hitler went into power from 1933 up until 1938, 40,000 certificates were given to Jews to be able to enter mandatory Palestine. That's 40,000 Jews out of a community of 600,000. And after Austria is annexed into the Reich with the Anschluss, that's another 200,000 Jews. So 40,000 is a nice number, but it wasn't enough. And the Viscount actually knew that it wasn't enough, and he addresses Parliament. On that same day, after the opening conversation, the opening debate about the real situation in Germany and in the Reich over the couple of weeks before this address to Parliament. And he says that the question of the refugees is a larger one. And yes, the Home Office is working as much as they can on processing visas. But actually, he believes that the younger refugees are the ones that could be saved. And he actually, in his address to Parliament, gives an example on why he believes this can happen. You see, his example is during the Great War, that's the First World War, Britain gave thousands of entry visas to Belgian children. And they were temporary visas, of course. And once the war ended, the Belgian children mostly returned back home. So the process of transporting, for lack of a better term, children, Kinder, from one country in the continent into the British island was a doable thing. So in his address to Parliament, he actually says, I think there will be children with whom we could deal in large numbers, provided they were sponsored by responsible bodies. And he continues and says that same morning he realized, after having conversations with different organizations, one of them being the Quakers, that there was a way for either different organizations or the families of the Jewish children, he actually calls them non-Aryan at this point, but the Jewish children, can sponsor this trip. When he addresses Parliament, he also states, he comes very well prepared, that the Home Office will be able to do all the processing of the documentation. But even more than that, he realizes that the logical route is to move the children from Germany and from Austria through the Netherlands. And he had already contacted the Dutch government and has arranged for safe passage for these Jewish children who are in transit, which meant that even if the children had to stay for a night or two in the Netherlands, that would be fine, and nobody would treat them in any ill way, and make sure that they make it on to the ferries that will take them into the British island. He also mentions at some point that he realizes the dilemma that Jewish parents would have with parting with their children, because the British government, cannot guarantee for adults any kind of special passes or refugee passes, because that might hinder the British economy, whilst children would not. And children would integrate much more at ease into the British life. This, of course, goes to vote in Parliament, and Parliament agrees. And 2 days later, the Parliament address was on the 28th of November, and on the 30th of November, we already have the first official letter that goes out from the Home Office explaining to the Dutch that the first group of 200 children, refugee children, well, it's about 200. They did not know at this point the exact number, so they rounded it off. Will be traveling, and they will be accompanied by a few adults, and etc., etc. And then, of course, on the 3rd of December, we found yet again another newspaper clipping with a report of the first transport. So this report is not fully true. It wasn't 200 children, it was 197, but we're not going to be petty on that. So the first transport leaves Germany, goes through the Netherlands. They leave on the 1st of December, and they arrive in England on the 2nd of December, 1938. So this brings us to a very prominent Jew from the UK, Sir Nicholas. And Sir Nicholas, he was born into a Jewish family, but a very assimilated and integrated family. In the early 30s, becomes a bit of a humanitarian activist, even though his field is economics. That is what he studied. He actually becomes a bank broker. And after the annexation of the Sudetenland, a couple of his friends say to him that he should go out to Czechoslovakia, to Prague, and see how terrible the conditions are for the Jews there. There are many refugees who left the Sudeten and come to Prague. There are also refugees who escaped from Germany, who escaped from Austria. There's more and more sanitary problems, hunger. It's altogether not a very good situation for these refugees. Now, Sir Nicholas already knows that the Kindertransport is in motion, but it is in motion in Germany and in Austria. So Sir Nicholas goes and requests from Parliament and from the Home Office to add on another group of children, this time from Czechoslovakia. Takes a bit of convincing, but at the end, he does succeed. And over 600 children, over the span of 9 months, are transported from Prague to England. And our next storyteller is Michelle Ultmann, telling us the story of Ruth Lichtenstein. Michelle?
Ruth woke the morning of November 10th, 1938, as if it was any other morning. She got up and got ready to go to school. She was quite independent for an 11-year-old. She got dressed, collected her books, ate a fast breakfast, said goodbye to her mother, and headed out the door to walk to school. When she got to the town square of her town of Breslau in far eastern Germany near Poland, she stopped, froze in her tracks. To the left of the town square, all the windows of the Jewish businesses were broken. To the right of the square, the synagogue was burning. An old man got up from the steps of the synagogue and yelled at her, "Go home. You are not safe here. Go home now." She turned around, and as fast as she could, she ran back to her apartment, up the stairs, and into her mother's arms. Her mother grabbed her and hugged her. And when Ruth could catch her breath, she looked up at her mother's face and saw a look that she had not seen for many years. She wasn't even sure how many, but it was when her father had died many, many years ago. She saw that look again of fear and worry. And her mother said, Ruth, after she had heard what had happened, she said, "Yes, I know what had happened at the square and why your dear friend Renata wasn't there. The Nazis had come in and arrested her father. I got a call about that earlier after you had left this morning. He has been taken away. You know, a few months ago when you had to change schools, you weren't that uncomfortable because all your friends went with you. But this is very, very serious. I'm going to have to search for how to leave Germany." And that is exactly what she did. Starting the next day, she went to one place or another, and she could not find any opening to let her and her daughter leave Germany. But she did hear about something called the Kindertransport. England had passed rules that permitted children ages 5 to 17 to leave their parents and come to England, where they would be housed and kept until the conflict had ended. Ruth's mother looked into her heart and with difficulty realized that this was the only way that she could save her daughter. And she proceeded to do the paperwork and pay the fees that would enlist Ruthie in the Kindertransport. Finally, they got word that her train would leave Berlin on June 5th, 1939. They packed and traveled to Berlin a few days before. When they got there, her mother sat her down and said, "Ruthie, look at this card." Ruthie looked at the card that she'd be wearing around her neck as she went on the transport in order to identify her. And she said, "I know who Fritz is. That was my father, but who is Erna?" And her mother explained to her, "That is your birth mother. She died when you were born, and I am actually your stepmother." Ruthie went mute, something she didn't do very often or for long, but she needed to be silent, and she thought things through. She thought that this beautiful woman had taken care of her and loved her, and that's all that was important to her. She was her mother. And they spent the next few days together and then went to the train station. Ruth had a little bit of sense of adventure. She was independent. She had the good fortune to travel with a schoolmate, and she was reassured that her mother would find a way to join her. In fact, maybe once she got there, she could help find a job for her mother. She climbed on the train, settled in the compartment, and watched her mother get smaller and smaller and smaller as the train pulled out of the station. She did not know at the time that that was the last that she would see of her, as she was lost in this conflict called the Holocaust. What she was aware of was right to her side was a young child crying her eyes out with no one there to comfort her. And she reached over, pulled her onto her lap, and comforted her all the way to the Dutch border. The Nazis climbed on the train and checked paperwork. It was very scary, but nothing bad happened in her car. And after they had left, the train pulled into the station at Hoek van Holland. And some women collected them and fed them sandwiches and hot chocolate. She didn't care very much about the sandwich, but the hot chocolate, it was warm, it smelled good, and it tasted delicious. After they were done with that, they were shuttled to the ferry, which took them from Hoek van Holland to Harwich, England. In Harwich, they boarded a train down to London, where they sat in the station with that card around their neck, waiting for the families to come and claim them and to start their new life in England. She waited a long time, but then finally a Mrs. Livingston came over and said, "Hello, Ruth, you're coming home to my family." And she headed out with this stranger who she could barely understand, and she started her life in England.
Thank you, Michelle. Now I need to get over my desperate craving for hot chocolate. That was beautifully told. And again, please give your appreciations to Michelle in the chat. And this is Ruth. And her paperwork and her name on the Kindertransport list. In total, from December 1938 up until mid-1940, 10,000 children were able to leave the Reich and find a safe haven in the UK. We shall now hear a poem by Cantor Karen Weber, A Boy, a Girl, a Train.
Thank you, Lynn. A boy, a girl, a train. After that jagged November night, more and more children and parents make their way to the train platform. We stand in an anxious row. A cold wind blows up the legs. A last hug to a rigid body, a smoothing down of a cowlick. Through tight smiles, we say we will see them soon, but we know this is a lie. If Mama looks back, will she turn to salt? Braids so tight, Sarah's eyes bulge. Fanya's reddening fingers close on the Bakelite handle of her suitcase. Inside Gerda's pencil box, perfectly shaped points made last night. Hans wears his name around his neck so he won't forget it. When Charlotte refuses to leave her accordion, it becomes her second suitcase. Ang's doll wears the clothes of Austria, green flowery skirt, red pinafore, white peasant blouse, and blue vest. Jack's Mutter slips her diamond ring into the teddy's belly. Lottie hugs Lolly so tightly to her chest, the baby doll grows a heart. Steffi's kitten puppet on her fist, blue glass eyes, and a mouth of pink wool. A girl, a boy. Train rolls to mystery. A boy, a girl, a train. Mother says I am too old for dolls. I smuggle Lenya under my panties anyway. My case feels heavy, but I don't discover the monogrammed silver until we reach Cambridge. When you save a single soul, do you save an entire world? 2015, I'm catching a train in the Liverpool station. There I meet 5 bronze children at the end of a bronze track, each gazing a different direction, thinking of home. The names of the cities they fled encircle them. Modern Londoners don't notice. They gulp their morning coffee and they toss the cup at the children's feet. The girl with the side tail lowers her violin case. A pigeon poops on the shoulder of the tall girl with the big bow in the back. Hail clinks on the boy's satchel and his coat toggles. He is wearing his first necktie and a tag with the number 333. A girl, a boy, a train.
Thank you, Karen. That was absolutely beautiful. And this is the Liverpool Station Monument.
There they are.
So, all the sources that you saw today were taken from Yad Vashem Archives, USHMM, British Newspaper Archive, Holocaust Memorial Day Trust UK, and the Weiner Library. So, we have now moved into a Q&A stage.